Clearing my throat. Hello, this is Matt Pollard and Eamon Shaw with Burgundy Wave. We're coming to you on Saturday, July 4th, 2026. So happy birthday, America. But here we're not talking about one former British colony who escaped and then found independence and greatness in the developed world. In America, we're talking about Australia, and we're talking specifically about Colorado Rapids center back Lucas Herrington, whose World Cup journey came to an end yesterday in penalties against Egypt. Amen. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm doing good. Unfortunate that Lucas Harrington is out of the World Cup, but it was a good journey.
Yes. So let's start with him generally at the World Cup and him getting here. We knew that he was a hot talent coming out of Brisbane Roar, and anytime you have a teenager starting in a first division league anywhere in the world, and they're 6'4", and their biggest attribute is good on the ball, that is going to be eyebrow raising. We've covered him here with the Colorado Rapids. Check that out on burgundywave.com and at Burgundy Wave across all social media platforms. But then that was well enough for him to get a look in March for a friendly in which he started for the Socceroos. He got man of the match in that one. And then it was kind of a question of, okay, based on form and injury, I was looking at Eamon of I think he could probably be the 26th guy on the roster, and I'm not sure much more about that. I think the big thing for me with Tony Popovich and just the way that he played defensively and organizationally is that just how much continuity was a big deal. And even if you're an extremely talented 18-year-old, or to use one of his teammates, I think called him a Rolls Royce defender, which is a pretty good compliment. He'd only been there for one game. He gets into camp. There's a bit of a rotation where a couple of players come out of camp, don't make the cut. Harrington was one of the groups that came in, was part of the group that replaced him. And then he comes in and he starts that game at the Rose Bowl against Mexico. I thought Australia was really good given the circumstances of that game. They only lose 1-0, and then at that point, he's on the roster. He's left off the squad for the first two games. I can understand the structure that you don't start an 18-year-old in the
Mhm.
opening game of a World Cup against, on paper, what we all thought was the best team in the group. And obviously, we were all wrong about that given what Turkey's World Cup ended up being. And I think if the U.S. play a
Yeah.
preferred starting 11, I do not think that Turkey goes home with 3 goals and a win. But so they get that result, and then understandable. I was talking to Joey Lynch, who covers Australia for New Zealand. He's based in New Zealand, and he said it's completely understandable that you don't change the back line after that performance against Turkey, knowing that then if you get a result against the U.S., you're through to the knockouts for sure. There were other things that conspired against Australia and was their undoing against the United States. Lucas was an unused sub in that game, but then in a must-result game against Paraguay, Lucas gets the start, plays really well. They get a 0-0 draw, though they were the better team. And then Lucas gets the start the other day in the round of 32 against Egypt, plays 120 minutes, and then obviously does really well defensively, and ultimately takes one of the two penalties that the Socceroos missed to lose. I think I don't have the scoreline of what it was in penalties, but I know he missed, and then I know the captain Harry Suter, also a center back, missed.
Yeah.
We'll touch on the penalty in a minute. Eamon, what stood out to you the most from, let's say, the friendly performance against Mexico and then the two starts against Paraguay and then against Egypt? What impressed you the most about what Lucas did in those games?
I think with Harrington, it continues to just kind of be his composure on the ball, and he's so young, to 18 years old, to be playing in a World Cup, and then to have just the mentality and the composure. And we've seen it at the Rapids, just how he leads the back line and how he plays with composure, plays on the ball, how he is defensively, how he is mentally. It's really exciting to see, and of course that's going to get him opportunity. Of course that's going to earn him the start, and of course that's going to give him the courage to take that penalty and the courage to keep kicking on in his career.
I think the big thing for me that at least I just noticed about the Egypt game, the other games where it was very clear that Mexico was going to have most of the ball and then try and do stuff up the middle, and Lucas kind of being the left center
Mhm.
back, where his main role is kind of that flanker, the Man City zone for the tactics nerds out there, and then pairing with the fullback that was mostly, I think Jordan Boss was playing a lot on that left flank, though he did have an injury in at right before halftime in the Egypt game. I think where there's a distinct difference, Eamon, in terms of what he is with the Rapids within that system in a back four versus what he is with a third
Yeah.
center back with Australia is that with Australia, it's a little bit more stay at home in terms of being reserved defensively, letting them come at you rather than being a little bit more
Yeah.
aggressive. I don't think there's any denying Tony Popovich is not as high energy, pressing like initiate the defense
Yeah.
as much as Matt Wells' system. So there were a few moments in that Egypt game, ironically not involving Mohamed Salah, in which I felt Lucas's default
Hmm.
answer or approach was to come out, attack the go after the attacker,
Yeah.
approach the ball rather than maybe stay back and concede the ground to then be a little bit more compact in the shape. And just where you draw that line of confrontation, I thought was a little bit interesting. I know I do know with three center backs, that gives you a little bit more liberty to do that. So I think that would have been an interesting question for Tony Popovich, though he got many other questions about what didn't go right for Australia
Yeah.
in the other game. But I mean, I don't think that that's not. Lucas has shown both with Rapids and with the Socceroos, an incredible situational awareness and calmness. Just everything that I've heard from the coaching staff that talks about
Yes.
him, the players and everything, is just that nothing really seems to phase him. Like he doesn't look bothered. And the Rapids try to play out of the back way more than Australia did in these four games, but just the Lucas Harrington has the ball and Hunman's son is coming up against him, and the way that he's able to just kind of slow things down and have that gravitas to make things look simple and make things look easy. He doesn't look rushed on the ball in ways that I think other
Yeah.
Australian center backs, when there was a player coming at them, they looked rushed in ways that I think certainly Noah Cobb can look a little flustered or think like, oh God, what do I have to do? Lucas is just, he's like the
Hmm.
Cape Verde goalkeeper that just dribbled around the guy of just oh, I've got a guy coming at me, dupe, I'm going to dink around you, and then I'm going to pass it really easily, and it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Lucas is when playing out of the back goes wrong proof, or at least he has been so far, both with the
Yeah.
Rapids and with the Socceroos. But I would be curious to know kind of how the defensive, 1v1 marking where he has something going on, but then there's a structure around him. And then is it like the Rapids where he wants to be really aggressive because there's other guys coming back? Does he want to be a little bit more reserved where, Australia, cares more about protecting the shape and protecting the structure? There's a few plays that it almost could have been like the Italian Catenaccio of he comes out and then the other center back comes out and they kind of it expands and
Yeah.
contracts depending on what it needs to be. So there were a few moments where I wouldn't say that Lucas was at fault the other day, or at least also against Paraguay, but there were some moments to where I think he was aggressive, a player potentially got to him, and it was reliant on then the next defender to clear a ball that was easily dealt with in the end, but that I think
Yeah.
could have potentially ended up poorly to where you would have blamed Lucas Harrington. Lucas was the player who kept the first Egypt goal on the set piece
Yeah.
onside, though I would not say, let's see, they did not, they got a clean sheet against Paraguay. I don't remember the goal offhand that they conceded against Mexico. I feel like I would have remembered it if Lucas was at fault. And then I wouldn't say that either
Yeah.
of the goals conceded the other day against Egypt, or no, excuse me, it was the two, yeah, that either of them were at fault. And Lucas was at the back post on the second Australia goal. And I think if that ball
Hmm.
gets in, we're having a very different conversation about Lucas Harrington, regardless of what happened.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to say about during the 90, during the 120, Eamon, or shall we get to the penalty?
We can just go on to the penalties. I think we've covered it all.
Yeah,
Um,
so Lucas was the fourth taker for Australia. Harry Suter went up first, the captain. He plays in Scotland. He missed his, and then Jackson Irvine and our Mabil made their penalties. And then when Lucas took it, it was 3-2 to Egypt. Lucas would have been in the top of the fourth round, the fourth inning. He misses his penalty, and then Hussam. I apologize here. Abdel Magid makes it, and then it ends up being 4-2 to Egypt. So certainly, I think there's a few things here, uh, Eamon, that it's a really well taken penalty. I think, or it's high and then to the
mm,
right. It's on goal, so it's not an easy save for the goalkeeper. Could it have been further away from where the goalkeeper was positioned? We'll edit this out. Could it have been further away from where the goalkeeper was positionally? Possibly, but I look at that penalty in a vacuum and I say that's a good save on a good taken penalty, whereas Harry Suter just punts it,
Yeah.
over the bar. So I don't
Yeah.
fault him on that. I think we also need to acknowledge that at that point, then, the Australian goalkeeper who was subbed out, who was Matt Ryan, the longtime captain for Australia, was subbed in for Patrick Beach in the 119th. And then there's been some scuttlebutt in the Aussie media space about how the goalkeepers didn't expect that. And you've seen that in the past. I know the Netherlands has done this in the past in World Cups. And at least when that has happened and worked, it's tend to be, or at least it's said publicly, that the goalkeepers knew what was going to happen. They were prepared for it. The goalkeeper in knew that if it went to pens, he wasn't going in. The goalkeeper on the bench was expecting to come in. And our understanding, based on the statements coming out of it, is that that was a surprise. And clearly that did not work. So, Matt Ryan comes in. He has four
Mm.
opportunities. He doesn't make a single save. I know he was close on one of them. I think the other three, he ends up diving the wrong way. So where was his head state out, given maybe mentally he's checked out in the 119th minute and then finds out. So all of this to say, Eamon, I do not blame Lucas Harrington for the failure of Australia not advancing. I don't blame him for missing the penalty. And I think that's been the overwhelming reaction that you've seen. I've seen a lot of posts on social
Hmm.
media
Yeah.
from Australia fans saying that they're proud of him, they support him. His teammates obviously were supportive as well. And then I just want to pull up. We won't play the video here for you, but I clipped it and we posted it on Burgundy Waves social media of Thierry Henry opening up saying, I want to talk about Lucas Harrington, saying, if you don't know, he plays for the Colorado Rapids. He says, quote, don't be upset, keep your head up. And this might be a Zlatan all-timer for me, Eamon, and I am a Zlatan truther here. Quote, you show a lot of courage. You are the best. Don't listen to the rest. If you want to reach out, I'm here. So the fact that within 5-10 minutes of
Yeah.
Lucas missing that penalty, that Thierry Henry acknowledges that he plays in MLS, talks about watching him in MLS and being impressed by him, the former New York Red Bulls designated player Thierry Henry. And Zlatan says, you're 18, penalties are a lottery. You're either a hero or a zero. Like, it happens. The best players miss penalties. And they both say to reach out to you. I don't think there's any denying Lucas, like, that was the worst moment of Lucas Harrington's 18-year-old career. Like, there are very few. What else could he do in club or professional football that is worse than knockout World Cup game? He's a starter. You make the penalty. You're in a position to advance further than your country's ever had, and your penalty is saved, and you go home. Like, that's the word. Like, if that happens to
Yeah.
Cristiano Ronaldo against Spain, that is going to haunt Cristiano for the rest of his life. So, this is the lowest it can possibly go, probably, in his career. And the fact that he's already here at 18, I think says so much to it. And I think the emotional response you've seen from Rapids Twitter, from Socceroos, from his own teammates, from members of the media, like, there should be no that Lucas is going to feel sad and about himself, and he's going to be in a dark room alone contemplating what he could have done differently for the next 24 or 48 hours. And on July 22nd against San Diego FC. He's going to walk out and he's going to start for the Colorado Rapids against San Diego, and he's going to get a big cheer when they announced, and from
Yeah.
Australia, number 25, Lucas Harrington. So he should feel loved and he should feel supported, and this is a learning opportunity. Eamon is a youth player, obviously completely different from playing in the World Cup. I mean,
Yeah.
how did you feel about penalties? What were your emotions? I was a right back. I never took them, so
Yeah.
I guess to refer to Zlatan and Thierry Henry, I was the coward who said, no, somebody else take them. They can miss and be the zero. What was your experience with penalties, or, how should someone feel about that?
Yeah, as I've played in the midfield, so usually I'm stepping up for the penalties. Recently haven't had any high stakes penalty shootouts, but when I was a youth player, I remember always stepping up, and I remember just kind of it was always nerve-wracking no matter what, and I can't imagine, I'm at a local park, playing in a club soccer game. I can't imagine the kind of stakes that you have during a World Cup game, but I always remember being super nervous, and then it's just about calming yourself down and then picking a spot and going for that spot. And I think Lucas Harrington did that well. I think
Hmm.
he showed a lot of courage to step up, which he's been commended on. I've seen, like you mentioned, I've seen so much stuff. Not blaming Harrington at all. All the blame is really coming back to Popovich, and I've seen just the amount of courage that it takes to step for a penalty. And I think Harrington just really has nothing nothing to be disappointed in, nothing to be sad about. He should feel proud. It takes a lot of courage, as everyone said, to step for a penalty and to do that in the way that he did.
Yeah, and Harrington took a penalty against switchbacks in a critical situation and made that penalty. We've got some good pictures up on Bernie
Yes.
Wave, and I think we have a bunch of really good pictures of Lucas Harrington in his Colorado Rapids kit, certainly. So, that showed I can understand why Popovich sees an 18-year-old be so impressive, be so composed, be really unflappable, and then have proof, oh, he played in a local derby in their equivalent of the FA Cup, took a penalty and then took it really well. And so I can understand, I can see the logic behind um, Popo deciding to let Harrington take the penalty. Even though, again,
Mhm. Yeah.
should he be fourth necessarily? Harry Suter took a penalty, he should convert it. But, there's stuff to be said. So I guess let's transition to what this means from a
Yeah.
Socceroo standpoint. Eamon, of I think it's World Cup cycle, be damned. Most coaches do not come back for another 4 years. So I do wonder, regardless of how good or how bad, I guess if they had won two more games, maybe I would have felt differently about this. But I don't know if at any point in the last month or even going back to last September, October, when Popovich was here with Australia, and I kind of, looked at them really intensely for a week because they were playing the United
Mm.
States, that, I thought he was going to be back. Not because I don't think he's a good or a bad manager, but this is just the natural cycle of international football. And I do wonder at this point whether or not Australia is kind of done trying to outkick their coverage with organized football. There's still going to be, a minnow relative to an Argentina or, a team that's got Mohamed Salah. And I would certainly say they're less talented than the United States are today. But you've got Nestor Irukunda, who's been fantastic for Watford in the championship. There's been a couple of higher level
Hmm.
Champo teams and
Yes.
some Premier League and other first division teams sniffing around him. I think there was a $15 million bid the other week that was was declined for him. You've got Jordan Boss playing in Europe. You've got Irvin as well, who I think one of those is at FC St. Pauli. Like that's nothing to snuff at. There's a few guys playing in the Scottish Premier League as well. Like there's a decent number of players in their prime age-wise playing for bigger clubs in Europe. And the two most talented youngsters are Nestroy
Hmm.
and Lucas. One of them could, by both of them, by the time you were listening to this video, listeners,
Yeah.
we could have gotten a here we go from Fabrizio Romano, or for Lucas at least, something from Tom Bogert about them moving clubs. If you told me right now that Nestor Irankunda in 18 months to 2 years is a starter in the Premier League or a team playing in Europa League, I'm like, yeah, I believe that. I see it is extremely unlikely that Lucas Harrington is with the Colorado Rapids in 12 months' time, right? So I don't know that we'd say a golden
Yes.
generation, Eamon, because I think like golden generation, I think you need like four or five guys and then a good supporting cast. So, the
Yeah.
U.S. is playing Belgium. So, they had Kevin De Bruyne, Eden Hazard, Romelu Lukaku, Toby Alderweireld, and then maybe there was somebody else. So I think four guys, certainly, at least three to make a generation, and then probably five, you can definitively say that you've got a generation. So I've just named two. Maybe there's somebody
Yes.
on the bench, and I know there was another defender for Australia that got some minutes in this tournament who is on New York City FC that is also young, and at least NYCFC fans really like him, and he has a connection, I think, to the Man City Academy, so maybe that's why he's with another city football group. Or no, he was at the I think it's Melbourne. There's whichever club has the Man City
Mm.
affiliation
Yeah.
in the
Yes.
A League. So so there's a couple young guys. The A League's growing. I've spoken to Judgmental Jim about that. Give me another 4 years. Some academy kids coming through at 16, 17, 20 for the A League. The A League is clearly willing to be a selling league when somebody comes in with decent money from another continent, preferably North America or Asia. I don't think there's any denying that you could have a really good, really young starting 11 in 4 years' time. And is Australia reaching a level of maturity to where oh, let's just come in, play three center backs or play flat 4-4-2, have one or two shots on goals and not in shots on goal in
Hmm.
90 minutes and grit our teeth through the group stage and then basically just take our chances with the same system defensively. I wonder whether or not we're seeing that
Yeah.
inflection point like we saw under Greg Berhalter in 2022 for the US, to where Australia is ready to be more progressive, to be more attacking, to be more the protagonist, and they've
Yeah,
got the
exactly. Yeah.
talent that reflects that. And I would say they're in a position to where they could do that. And I think having
Hmm.
a 6'4" center back who's probably going to be playing in Champions League in 4 years, whose best skill is being strong and calm on the ball to where he's press resistant and playing out of the back, and then having a really good pacey winger who's skillful and creative on a team of organized, really neat and
Yeah.
tidy, sound defensive players is a really good foundation for that. So, Eamon, is Lucas going to be, not saying that he's the Kevin De Bruyne of their equivalent generation, but I do think Lucas is a potential inflection point to where we will think about Australian football differently in 2030.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and I think he definitely can be. I think one of the most interesting things is, as you mentioned, I think Aussie footy is kind of at the same point where the U.S. was a few
Hmm.
years ago. Obviously, had a new generation coming in, a younger generation, and it was about raising expectations a bit. I think watching Australia against Turkey was, Australia looked really good. I think Aaron Kunda and Torre together, and then how they would defend, how they would counter. They looked really good, and I think one of the most interesting parts, and I think why it's so disappointing from Aussie Twitter, is just because from there Popovich changed things up. Didn't start Aaron Kunda or Torre in the next match against the U.S. And then I think it's just interesting to see where they came after such a good win in the first against Turkey, and then to go from where they were at, and then to go from that, and then to go kind of into a shell a bit, defending as attacking. I think it was interesting to see, and I think that's what's so disappointing because I think this Australian team could have definitely advanced into the round of 16. I think there's so much potential there for this generation, for this young generation. You've listed off a number of players, but I think give it 4 years time, and I think they're in a really good spot. And I think it's just for them, I think it's about getting every little detail right as well, getting the squad right, getting the coach right, getting the tactics right. What is going to be best for this Australian team to in order to capitalize on this generation? Um, but yeah, it's really exciting times, really good generation, and I think Harrington can definitely be um, a sole piece of that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the beauties of club football is just the way that you'll get these random little connections to where, fans have an
Hmm.
affinity for or will be attached to something. I don't know if you saw the other day, Eamon, but Jack Price that got announced he was going back to
Yeah,
Shrewsbury, and you saw a number of people on Rapids Twitter just react to it. I have to imagine if I polled every single Rapids fan, hey, here's the 24 teams in, the EFL League One. Who are you rooting for this season? We're rooting for Shrewsbury Town because they've got Jack
yeah,
Price. I think there's a bunch
yeah,
of Rapids fans. We don't watch a whole lot of Ligue 1, but I think if you ask them, what do you identify? It's OGC Nice. We're rooting for La Bomba, for Mois Bambito. So I'm really excited to see. I
hmm,
hope it's for that case, I hope it's not Barcelona or Liverpool, maybe, but it would be great for Lucas. But that there's going to be these small little connections, and I
yeah,
bet you at some point in the World Cup in 2030, and it's going to be weird because of how geographically spread out it's going to be. So it's not going to be like it. I don't know how much
hmm,
crossing paths
yeah,
there's going to be. Let's make the safe assumption that the United States and the Australia are not playing any of the opening games in South America, but maybe there's a flight internationally in Madrid, and somebody waiting for a layover or a beach um,
yes,
in Portugal. There's going to be one small connection out of the 1 million that happen in which a USA fan in a Stars and Stripes jersey and an Aussie fan in the Aussie yellow cross paths,
yeah,
and like I want to believe, if nothing else, Eamon, I will manifest this. I will be this person. I will go to the 2030
yeah,
World Cup. I will specifically I will make a conscious effort to go out and find a random Aussie, and I will go up to him and I will say Lucas MFing Harrington, and we're going to talk about that
yeah,
penalty, and we're going to talk about his time with the Rapids, and they're going to complain about Tony Popovich, and I'm going to take a picture with their giant inflatable kangaroo, and like that's going to be a small little thing that's
hmm,
absolutely wonderful in ways is that, in what other circumstances would a random, just, S posting, poop housing football fan in Shrewsbury have a reason to interact with anybody from the state of Colorado, or would know where
Yeah.
Colorado is on a map, or Colorado fans to know where in England is Shrewsbury, if not just, oh, like not in the north near one of the major cities and not near London? What are the reasons will we have to connect to each other? But we both really like Jack Price and have fond memories of him, so we're going to talk about that. So that's one of the beauties of world football, and I'm really excited to see what happens. And I do think the Aussie game is bright, though there's some stuff structurally that certainly has to
Yeah.
change. And I think, regardless of the criticisms of the negativity from Tony Popovich and everything, I do think it was time for a new voice, regardless. Let's look at where this goes from a rapid standpoint, Eamon. I have to imagine, after all of the most World Cup players get a break, even if their team has already started preseason. A lot of Europe is back this week, or I know there's a few teams that have like warm up
Yes.
friendlies today. For example, Connor Ronan's already in preseason with Aberdeen in Scotland. Granted, I think they come back in August, so that might vary from a couple of weeks. But the players normally have a couple of weeks off at the beginning, at the end of June, early July. So this is going to be their break anyways. So I have to imagine that I do not think that Lucas is on a plane right now to Denver with the goal of him being in training tomorrow if they were training on Sunday for some reason. But I do think it's an interesting question of how much time he's going to get off. I imagine he'll want to play, and the team will want him back for the July 22nd game. That's a big game against San Diego, and then they're playing that weekend as well. I know they've got the two games, and then there's the All-Star game on the Wednesday of the following week. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but there's a lot of rumors coming around, Amen, as I've reported. The Rapids notoriously do not negotiate deals where a player is on international duty. They took calls on Moise Bombito, is my understanding. They took calls on Bombito
Mm.
when he was at Copa America. They didn't agree to anything. They didn't agree to anything with the club that was trying to buy him. And then they left. Moise was functionally in a bubble. Not even, I'm not sure he was even talking to his agent, to be honest. Maybe it was like hey,
Yeah.
there's some interest. We'll talk about this when the tournament's over. Now the tournament's over. I think at this point, Lucas is in the first half of a 4-year deal. There's no rush for the Rapids to sell. I think, like Bombito, he's shown that what he's done the last couple of weeks and the last 6 months is not a fluke or something to where he's going to fall off a cliff.
Yeah.
Lucas and his representation made it clear that the reason why they chose the Rapids over opportunities in Europe is because it was a chance to play what Lucas called men's football as opposed to academy football. So basically, not reserve team. So it wasn't like the Benfica
Mhm.
deal that was offered to Cole Bassett that he turned down because he didn't just want to go there and then be on the U21s. He wanted to try and get in with the first team. So I do think that Lucas has said multiple times when he's been poked about it in media of I've got a good support structure around me. I'm not trying to get too high or too low. It's great that there's interest, but like I'm focused on the here and now. And I imagine that Lucas was not thinking about Liverpool or Barcelona when he stepped up to take that penalty the other day. I have to imagine if Lucas is in the
Mhm.
lineup on July 22nd, he's not thinking about Liverpool and Barcelona. He's thinking about, let's stop Anders Dreyer and let's get 3 points at home. So I think in that regard, he's got a really good big head on some really tall shoulders, and he's got a good system around him at the club and in his personal life and in his representation. But I do think it's an interesting question, Eamon, of I think any club in MLS other than Miami with Messi needs to have a price for everybody. LA Galaxy just sold Gabriel Peck.
Mhm.
They had a price for him. There is a scenario in which Lucas Herrington is sold. Okay, Lucas. So if Moise Bombito was worth 9 million, having balled out at Copa America and was 23, what is Lucas Herrington work at 18, having balled out at the World Cup?
I think with him, I think you can go anywhere from 10 to 15 million. I think that would be a fair price.
Yeah.
Um, I think the biggest thing that the Rapids will want to look for is definitely a good spot for him where they know he'll continue his career. Obviously, being a big part in his development, they'll want to see him be successful, and I think they'll want to get what's worth of him, what's worth of getting the most out of him, and being able to use that elsewhere. But I think definitely anywhere from the 10 to 15 range is definitely a fair price.
Yeah, that's the number I've had in my head. I could see it being 20.
Mhm.
I think it would depend on what's the caliber of club, and then is there a sell-on clause?
Yeah.
What does that end up
Yeah.
looking like as well? I think is an interesting question because obviously the Rapids had that set up with Moise Mambita where he was making a big chum up. Nice is what I would say one of the top five, top seven
Yeah.
teams in the league right now. They've regularly qualified for European Championship. That's a big deal. I don't think Nice is winning a trophy anytime soon unless they make a cup run and maybe somebody else upsets PSG along the way to them winning the whatever the France Copa France. I'm not sure what the name of it is. So obviously if he's going, I think that number, what's the number up front and what's the number on the front of the
Mhm.
transfer fee changes when you go from Everton or West Ham before West Ham got relegated to a Liverpool or a Barcelona. I think if it's one of
Yeah.
those clubs coming in, then you're saying like you're selling on the high front because then at 30 million, if let's say if Lucas just doesn't work out, if he's not the next Virgil van Dijk, then Liverpool wants to recoup that. I don't think they're certainly not recouping 30 million if they sell him to, I don't want to throw out a number, a team, but a mid-tier Premier League team that he were to go to. I think they're recouping some of that fee. That's the risk of doing business when you're one of the teams
Yeah.
that burns money in the Premier League for fun or prints money and then burns it for fun. But I don't know that they, buying him for 30, having him take 4 years, maybe going on loan for 6 months to the championship, getting in and out of the squad, not becoming the heir apparent to Virgil van Dijk, and then selling him for 21 plus incentives to, let's say I don't know, Aston Villa, Newcastle, for
Yeah.
example, like one of those others. I don't want to disparage other teams for not being Liverpool here, but then I think, buying him for 30 and then selling him for 20, it could rise to 24 is different when the Rapids are taking 10, 15,
Mhm.
25% of that. So I
Definitely.
do think
Yeah.
if I'll go out here and say it if it's I'll give you a very specific prediction. If it is Liverpool or Barcelona, I would say there is no sell-on clause. And I would say then we're talking about 15 to 20 million with probably 5 million
Mhm.
worth of incentives. I would think you would up the number of incentives and decrease the sell-on clause or do away with the sell-on clause in lieu of that. And I think just to think about, we've seen the numbers as well. I don't know if you saw the statement, but Brisbane Roar had a really cringe public like club statement about
Yeah.
them
I did see
selling
that. Yeah.
about the Rapids buying out the sell-on clause that just looked at
Yeah.
ownership tried to kind of save face and here's why it makes sense for us and your letter saying that you don't care about what the haters are saying is answering more questions than you think about it. It's the meme of I'm not mad, don't put in the newspaper I'm not mad. The so
Yeah.
obviously I think buying him for I think it was 1.5 million Aussie, and I think it depends on when we're saying the Rapids are the paying for the initial fee up front because last summer was when you had a lot of the tariffs going on with the United States. So then that caused the currency market
Yeah.
to kind of shift.
Yeah.
And I had reported that the numbers that led to a little bit of fluctuation with the Paxton Aronson transfer fee, where they agreed to a payment up front, but then I think the Rapids for most of the time they do it in the selling club's currency. So then it was done in euros, and then it was done in chunks. So then
Mhm.
like the euro goes up or down relative to the dollar over the course of like the next month when the next payment is due, and that could change what the fee is from a USD standpoint. So I think I did the math a few ways depending on when the Rapids would have paid the initial $960 Aussie last summer, and it comes out to right around a million. So it's somewhere between 1.2 and like 850. So let's call it that. So let's call it $1 million. But to buy him for a million and sell him for easily 10, possibly 15 plus, and I think is obviously a huge return. And then the Rapids, that's 10 more lottery tickets than
Yes.
that
Definitely.
the Rapids could go in and
Definitely.
get. Let's talk about so. We've both talked about what we think the price is, Eamon. I think it's really clearly, it's just a matter of does a club come in for what the Rapids say the valuation is at, and does Lucas and his
Yeah.
representation think that that's a good landing spot? And maybe that's a Liverpool pitching them of the, hey, we're going to have you go on loan to back to the Rapids for the last 6 months. We'll let you finish out that season. You'll have that continuity there. That's good for your development. Just like Arsenal did with Austin Trusty. You'll come in with us mid-season. We will find a soft landing spot that's a loan opportunity
Hmm.
somewhere in the championship for you to just get used to English football. And then you're going to come in and you're going to hit the ground running preseason rise. Like I've thought like that's a path forward. If Pep Guardiola was still at Manchester City, amen, like that number's starting with 20 million, like as far as I'm concerned. But I could almost see where Pep would
Yeah.
come in and say, I love what you're doing on the ball. You don't need more minutes. You don't need to get more fit. You've been playing at altitude. You've got those Aussie genes. Here's our trainer. You're living and sleeping in the gym for 6 months, and you're going to gain 20 pounds of muscle. And you're going to come out for training for an hour just to make sure that you don't lose your ball skills. Like that's kind of the one concern I have if he was to go to England. I think if he
Yeah.
goes to Barcelona, then it's just straight into what's he doing tactically and what's he doing technically. But so I think it's the two buckets are the Rapids have a price. Somebody needs to meet that price. And then he's 18 years old. He's got a really good future. How does that club see him developing and making the jump up from the
Hmm.
Colorado
Yeah,
Rapids and
definitely.
MLS to a Champions League team? And what does that look like in terms of is there a loan back to the Rapids? Is there a loan somewhere else? Pitch to him that he's not just going into the phantom zone that is like if Lucas is going to Chelsea, like I would pity, like I would feel so bad for him, honestly, because who knows,
Hmm.
like that situation could change in
Yeah,
six
definitely.
weeks. It could change in 6 months. I have no idea. He could come out after a 5 year contract, having only been on loan, not actually play with the first team whatsoever, and just be a
Yeah.
broken man like Matt Miazga or Gaga Slonina. So I do not want Chelsea to happen to him. But like, what does that plan look like? And does someone pitch
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
plan well
definitely.
to him in ways that the Rapids do? Um, Eamon, the last game of the season, whenever that is for the Rapids, end of the regular season, playoffs, whatever, is Lucas Harrington still with the Colorado Rapids?
I'm gonna make my prediction here, and I'm going to say no. I'm gonna say he's not with the Rapids.
You think he's going this summer then?
I think he is going to
Mm.
go this summer.
I think he's sold this summer. I think he's sold sometime later this month or early in August. I think that the Rapids negotiate to have him back, and he is with the Rapids on paper till December 31st. Functionally, he's with them until their season ends.
Yes.
I wanted more time with Moist Bumpito, Amen. Or I think there is an alternate universe
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
which Nice says, we'll let you have him on loan through the end of the season and he can come with us in January. And I've asked
Yeah.
myself the what if of what does the end of that Rapid season look like if Moise is still there? And I would have concerns about the Rapids making the playoffs or doing something else or progressing into next season if, let's just say Lucas is sold tomorrow and he's on a plane to Barcelona or wherever. I would have concerns about that, even with Louis Williams being in with the team for a couple of months. If nothing else, Eamon, the potential for, I think, Lucas gets revenge against St. Louis on September 15th or 16th in the semifinal. And I think about playing a really good but kind of broken and injured Columbus Crew team on the road in an Open Cup final, or playing against Anton Griezmann in an Open Cup final in Orlando. And I think the
Hmm.
knock $1 million off of whatever that transfer fee is for like rolling the dice of winning the second ever major trophy in club history. And I think that's worth it. And I think if Lucas Harrington can do it in a 10-day span against Lionel Messi, Heung-min Son, and Thomas Mueller, and then can do it at the World Cup for 120 minutes against Mohamed Salah, then I think absolutely Lucas Harrington can do it on a rainy, musty night
Yeah.
in Orlando against Antoine Griezmann and his Nando's
Absolutely.
chicken.
Yes.
Amen. Thank you for joining me. Anything else that we missed here, or shall we close out this YouTube video?
I think we can close it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Check out all
Yeah,
of.
as you said with yeah, as you said with Bombito, I mean, I think there's a lot of players through the time as a Rapids fan and covering the Rapids where you always want a little more time with them and then, obviously they're gone.
Yeah.
But yes.
The Rapids had an amazing role in Lucas getting to living out his dream of playing for his country at the World Cup. And regardless of what comes next or when it comes next, the Rapids will have a very important role in Lucas's story, just like they did with Austin Trusty getting an opportunity to go to
Yep.
Europe and then be with the U.S. men's national team in the World Cup, just like how they did with the same thing with Moise Bombito. And I'm seeing that with Lucas Herrington, and I think that's an incredible pipeline. And what do the Rapids do with hopefully 10 to 15 to 20 lottery tickets that they're going to get when they
Yeah.
sell Lucas Herrington is a really good, interesting story. And Lucas could end up playing, a 6 month player. He could come back in 10 years' time on vacation or on summer tour with Barcelona or Liverpool, and he could just be on the sideline, easily
Yep.
recognizable, and Rapids fans will cheer him. So I'm grateful that we've even.
Yeah.
I am not going to
Absolutely.
cry when it is over, Eamon. I'm going to smile that it's happened, and
Well,
it's already been wonderful,
yeah.
regardless of
Yes.
Lucas's failure. And I don't think it's wrong to call it a failure the other day against Egypt. Check out all of our content on burgundywave.com. We are at Burgundy Wave on all social media platforms. We will have written content up on Lucas Harrington, and I'm so glad it's been a banner couple of weeks for the site in terms of traction. So for curious Rapids fans who've gotten more interested into the game because of the Rapids, because of the World Cup, welcome. For the good chunk of people on Socceroos Twitter who have found us and engaged with us, thank you. Stay tuned. We will, as long as Lucas is with the Rapids, we will be giving you that sweet Lucas content and Lucas updates as well. And for the future Liverpool or Barcelona fans who are watching this, when your club buys Lucas Harrington, hopefully this informed you and got you really excited about him coming to join your team in preseason. But thank you for watching us here on the Burgundy Wave YouTube channel. We'll see you soon.